Seconds before I signed away the house that held my entire childhood, the $6 million place in Lake Oswego that had been in our family for decades, Grandpa walked in with the sheriff. I was 19 years old, sitting in a downtown Portland notary office, the fluorescent lights buzzing above my head and the cold laminate table pressing against my palms. The air smelled of stale coffee and ink. The pen was already in my hand, my parents looming behind me like shadows. They whispered in unison, urging me to finish what they had started. My father's voice was sharp, my mother's sharper still. "Do it now, Clara. Show us you are loyal. Show us you belong." The notary looked at me directly and asked the standard question that was supposed to ensure free will. "Are you signing this of your own choice?" My lips parted, but no words came. My throat felt like it had locked shut. My parents closed in, and I felt the pressure of their presence, as if the walls themselves were moving closer. I thought of all the nights I had spent believing I was invisible. I thought of every moment they had told me I was the quiet one, the practical one, the one who did not matter. Now I understood. They had been shaping me for this moment, for this very surrender. The paper in front of me was not just words and signatures. It was my existence erased with a flourish of ink. I could feel tears forming, but I forced them back. If I cried, they would say I was weak. If I resisted, they would call me selfish. My hand trembled as the tip of the pen touched the page. My heart pounded with a rhythm that seemed loud enough for the notary to hear, yet he remained neutral professional, waiting for me to say yes. Inside, I screamed, but outside, I sat frozen. A daughter caught between duty and survival. My parents leaned closer. My mother hissed, "Do not embarrass us, Clara. This is family." My father muttered, "If you love us, you will not hesitate." The word love twisted in my ears, sounding nothing like what it should. Just as the ink threatened to mark the line forever, the door burst open. The sound cracked the stale silence like thunder. In walked Grandpa William Coate, heavy on his shoulders, eyes blazing with the kind of fire I had never seen in him before. Beside him was Sheriff Daniels in uniform, his presence filling the room with authority no one could challenge. The notary startled and immediately pushed the file back toward the center of the table. My parents froze, caught in the act they thought they had perfected. Grandpa's voice was steady, each word deliberate. "This signing is under investigation. There will be no coercion here today." My hand dropped the pen. My lungs finally filled. For the first time in years, I was not silent. I was not erased. I was seen. And that moment changed everything. When I think back to Lake Oswego, to the manicured lawns and the glossy surface of that lakeside neighborhood, my first memories are not of comfort or laughter, but of always being slightly out of focus, the extra figure in photographs, the name called only when something was missing or broken. My sister Vanessa was born 2 years before me, and from the start, she was the star. I remember her in new dresses, satin ribbons in her hair, patent leather shoes that clicked against the church floor on Sundays, while I wore hand-me-downs from cousins or rummage sale finds that never quite fit. At family gatherings, people would stop to tell my parents how beautiful Vanessa was, how tall, how graceful, how she was destined for greatness. Their eyes might glance my way and they would say something softer, something like, "And she is the quiet one, the practical one, the helper." Those words meant to console became the script of my childhood. Quiet meant invisible. Practical meant unworthy of indulgence. Helper meant servant. I learned to lower my gaze and swallow the sting. I remember one birthday most vividly when I was 9 and Vanessa was 11. The living room was crowded with folding chairs, balloons taped to the walls, and a cake that had my name on it in frosting, though the celebration hardly felt like mine. When the candles were lit, I leaned forward, but Vanessa blew them out before I could even take a breath. Everyone clapped as if it was natural. My mother laughed and said, "She did it for you, Clara, because you are shy." The camera flash popped, and the photograph that went into the family album showed Vanessa grinning over the cake while my figure was blurred at the edge, almost cropped out. That image followed me for years, displayed on the mantelproof, not of my existence, but of my absence. It was then that I realized birthdays, holidays, milestones, they were not about me. They were about Vanessa, the curated daughter, the one meant to shine. My mother, Denise, orchestrated it all. She barked directions during every event demanding that Vanessa stand just so, smile just right while I was asked to fetch napkins to pick up wrapping paper to stay out of the way. My father Martin enforced it with silence, never intervening, never offering balance. He believed order was more important than fairness. If Vanessa wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I was told to wait or to be practical. Practical became the cage I lived in. I retreated into notebooks sketching the house by the lake, the wooden beams, the gables, the rooms where I imagined myself free. While Vanessa practiced piano recitals and posed for photographs, I sat cross-legged on the floor with pencils tracing lines of imaginary homes, convincing myself that architecture could build me an escape. Every Sunday at church, I watched my mother stroke Vanessa's back as she sang hymns while I sat alone 2 pews down, swinging my feet, waiting for the service to end. I began to believe that love was something you earned, and even then, you might not receive it. I tried to earn it by getting good grades, by never talking back, by making myself useful. The result was predictable. The more invisible I became, the more they depended on me, yet the less they acknowledged me. Years bled into one another with the same pattern. Vanessa always front and center. Clara always blurred at the margins. When Vanessa entered high school, she became homecoming queen material, the girl whose smile drew attention in grocery stores while I stayed in the shadows. Teachers praised my diligence, but family gatherings never mentioned my name. It was always Vanessa, this Vanessa, that, and I learned to disappear without anyone noticing. I remember standing at the edge of the driveway one autumn evening watching Vanessa ride off in a new car bought for her 16th birthday, the red paint glistening under the streetlights. I was 14, clutching my school backpack, knowing there would be no car for me, only expectations to walk, to wait, to figure it out on my own. My mother said it was good for me, that it would make me stronger. What it made me was quieter. At 17, I was balancing 2 part-time jobs, saving pennies, while Vanessa applied to colleges out of state with essays my parents paid someone to polish. They attended her orientation trips with matching shirts, while I stayed behind with Grandpa William in Salem, the only person who ever looked at me without judgment. He taught me how to drive using his old truck, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to stand my ground. He told me that silence can be armor, but only if you choose when to remove it. Still, when I returned to Lake Oswego, the pattern reasserted itself. My mother praised Vanessa's beauty. My father spoke of her future, and I was once again the helper. Invisible daughters learn early to carry the weight no one else wants. We pick up the scraps, we smooth the edges, we disappear when the camera flashes. Yet those years also sharpened me. I learned to observe every detail, to read moods, to anticipate storms before they broke. Architecture became more than a dream. It became the language I used to survive. Each sketch was a promise to myself that one day I would design a space where I was not erased, where my name was not a placeholder, where the walls did not echo with comparisons. By 19, standing at the threshold of adulthood, I carried all those invisible years like bricks in a backpack. And when my parents called me back about the Lake Oswego house, I already knew. They had never seen me as a daughter. They had always seen me as leverage, a piece on the board, to be moved when convenient. My childhood had been the rehearsal. The notary office was to be the performance, but what they had forgotten was that even an invisible daughter learns where to draw the line. There was another memory that etched itself deep into me, one that returned often when I sat alone with my thoughts. It was a summer afternoon when I was 12, the kind of day when the Oregon heat pressed heavy against the windows and the air smelled faintly of cut grass. We were in the backyard for a family barbecue. Relatives from Salem and Eugene had gathered, uncles telling stories, cousins chasing one another near the hedges. My father was grilling steaks, his laughter booming whenever someone praised his cooking. At the center of it all, of course, was Vanessa. She had just turned 14 and was wearing a white sundress, hair tied back in a perfect braid. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. People brought her extra slices of watermelon, offered to refill her soda, asked her about school and music. I was seated at the far end of the picnic table with a paper plate that sagged under potato salad. No one noticed when I tried to join the conversation. At one point, my cousin Ethan asked if he could take a family photo. Everyone gathered by the maple tree clustering close together. I ran over to squeeze in, but before I could position myself, my mother hissed under her breath, "Clara, step aside. You're blocking your sister." I obeyed. The photo hung later in our living room, Vanessa glowing in the center. My parents on either side, cousins around them, and me reduced to half a shoulder at the very edge. That picture was a declaration Vanessa was the story. I was the footnote. It did not end there. At school, when I earned top marks, my parents barely glanced at the report card. When Vanessa earned a B in math, my mother hosted a congratulatory dinner. When I won second place in a regional art contest for a house design I sketched, my father told me it was a nice hobby but not a real career. When Vanessa performed at a choir concert, the whole family attended with flowers and applause. I stopped expecting recognition. I stopped raising my voice. I learned that invisibility was the safest way to avoid disappointment. Yet invisibility has a cost. It erodes you quietly until you question whether you exist at all. I remember lying awake at night in my small bedroom at the back of the house, tracing the cracks in the ceiling, with my eyes wondering if anyone would miss me if I disappeared. The Lake Oswego house that looked so grand from the outside felt like a stage where I was cast as an understudy who never got to perform. I carried that silence into my teenage years, and though I wore it like armor, it seeped into every interaction. I avoided confrontation. I kept my head down. I let others take the spotlight. It was easier that way, but deep down, a quiet rebellion stirred. I promised myself that someday I would walk into a room and not be told to step aside. Someday the photograph would not crop me out. That promise became sharper as high school ended and Vanessa moved on to college. She left Oregon for California with suitcases my parents bought her and tuition they paid in full. I stayed behind, working shifts at a cafe and tutoring younger students to save money for my own future. My parents told me bluntly, "We cannot afford two colleges. Vanessa's education comes first." They said it with a straight face as if I were not their daughter too. Grandpa William tried to intervene, offering to help with my expenses, but my parents brushed him off, calling him old-fashioned. He never pushed, but he made sure I knew his door in Salem was always open. During those years, I found solace in the quiet corners of the house, sketching floor plans late into the night, dreaming of structures that could hold me when people would not. My notebooks filled with images of bridges, towers, cottages by the sea. I drew the Lake Oswego house again and again, but each time I changed something. Sometimes I removed the front door. Sometimes I erased the living room where so many photographs had excluded me. Sometimes I drew myself standing in the yard larger than the house itself, as if I had finally outgrown it. That private act of redesigning became my rebellion, a way to reclaim what was denied. Yet even as I created those drawings, I knew the family saw me only as the practical one, the placeholder, the one who would sacrifice quietly when the time came. My mother's voice echoed through my head. "Clara, you should be grateful you have a roof over your head." My father's words. "Do not expect too much. Life is not fair." They thought they were shaping me into someone obedient. They did not realize they were teaching me how to observe every crack, every weakness, every leverage point. By the time I turned 19, my silence was no longer surrender. It was preparation. I had been dismissed, overlooked, pushed to the edge of every frame. But when the call came about the Lake Oswego house, when they demanded my signature to strip me of the only inheritance that tied me to belonging, I was ready. My childhood had built the case file in my mind. Every photo, every slight, every erased moment had stacked up like evidence waiting to be used. And though they believed I would fold as always, I knew this time I would not. My parents had rehearsed their script for years. They did not expect me to write my own ending. By the time I was 19, I was no longer living in Lake Oswego, but in a tiny rented room above a bakery in Portland, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of yeast and sugar, even when I came home past midnight from my shift at Stumptown Coffee Roasters. The hours were long and the pay was modest, but it gave me independence, and for the first time I felt like I owned something, even if it was only my time. I was balancing classes at Portland Community College with work sketching floor plans in the quiet hours before dawn. I told myself that architecture was still possible if I pushed hard enough. My phone rarely buzzed with family messages. When it did, it was usually a chain of photos of Vanessa at some influencer event, her smile perfect, her captions crafted to show a family that did not match reality. Then one Thursday night, my phone rang with my mother's number. I hesitated before answering because calls from her were never casual. "Clara," she said without pause, her voice brisk and sharp. "Come home tomorrow. It's about the house." I asked what she meant, but she only repeated, "It is important. Do not be difficult." The line went dead. The next evening, I drove the 20 minutes back to Lake Oswego, past the glittering houses and manicured lawns that had always felt like fortresses of privilege. The Whitman home stood tall with its cedar siding and wide windows facing the lake, a property that realtors now valued at $6 million. Inside, the dining table was already full. 10 chairs occupied 10 people talking and eating. There was no seat for me. My father, Martin, barely glanced up from his plate of roast beef. My mother, Denise, gestured toward the kitchen. "Put those rolls in there," she said, not acknowledging the 2-hour detour I had made after class to pick them up. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, my coat still on. My cousin scrolled through her phone. My uncle laughed about his new boat, and Vanessa sat in the center with her perfect posture leading the prayer as though she were the matriarch. When she finished, she lifted her glass and smiled. "To family unity," she said. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching them eat. My Uncle Ray noticed my stance and smirked. "You are lucky to still be invited, Clara. Most ex-wives do not get that courtesy." Laughter rippled around the table. My mother added with a sharp laugh, "She is not much for spotlight moments anyway." I felt my face flush, but I said nothing. That silence was my lifelong role. Yet when the plates cleared, my father finally turned his gaze to me. "You are of age now, Clara. Tomorrow you will sign the papers." His tone was cold, as if the decision had already been made. "It is about the house," my mother added. "To protect it, to keep it in the family. You will sign it over to Vanessa. It is the responsible thing." The words hit harder than the laughter had. $6 million of heritage land and structure that was supposed to tie us together suddenly stripped from me. They dressed it in logic, taxes, strategy, family duty. But I saw it clearly. It was the same script as childhood. Vanessa shines, Clara obeys. That night, I lay awake in my Portland room, listening to the hum of traffic below and the faint clang of dishes from the bakery downstairs. The house in Lake Oswego was more than a building. It was the only inheritance left to me, the one place Grandpa had promised would be my safe harbor if ever I needed one. To have it taken to be erased from it was not just financial theft. It was identity theft. Still, I returned the next morning as ordered. In the living room, my parents had spread papers across the oak table. Legal documents with dense paragraphs, some already bearing my name in a handwriting that was not mine. Vanessa perched on the sofa, scrolling her phone, looking up only to smirk. "Consider it done, Clara," she said sweetly. "You are just the placeholder." My mother's eyes flashed as she slammed her palm on the table. "It is your duty. Family comes first. Stop being dramatic," my father added with measured disdain. "Do not act selfish. Think of the legacy." My hands trembled as I looked at the documents. Something inside me cracked a mixture of anger and fear. I remembered every erased photograph, every stolen birthday, every laugh at my expense. I wanted to run. Instead, I whispered, "I am not ready." My mother's face hardened. "Do not embarrass us, Clara." Vanessa's smirk deepened. "She will do it. She always does." In that moment, I realized the walls of the house were closing in again, just like when I was a child, hiding in the back of family portraits. Yet a different voice stirred in me now, quieter but firm, the voice that had been waiting all these years. It told me that if I gave in, I would vanish for good. I walked out of the house without signing my parents shouting behind me. I drove to Salem that night to Grandpa Williams' modest home near the courthouse square. He was waiting on the porch as though he knew I would come. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, the scent of black coffee filling the air, and I told him everything. His face remained still as stone until I mentioned the forged signatures. Then his jaw tightened. "Do not sign without me," he said. "Get everything in writing. Record them. You are not alone in this, Clara." For the first time, I believed it. That night, I began documenting, taking photographs of the papers, saving recordings of conversations, building a record. My parents thought they were preparing for a transaction. What they did not know was that I was preparing for a battle. The following week carried a heaviness that clung to every step I took, whether I was handing out lattes at Stumptown or scribbling notes during lectures. I tried to focus on customers' orders, on assignments, on anything ordinary, but every quiet moment was haunted by the image of those papers spread across the oak table in Lake Oswego, my name scribbled in someone else's hand. My parents had crossed a line that could not be blurred into family duty. They had forged me. At night, I scrolled through property listings, comparing the value of homes around the lake, trying to ground myself in the reality that the Whitman house was worth $6 million. That was not just a home. That was a life's foundation, a generational anchor, and they expected me to give it up as though it were a trinket. Grandpa called me every evening to check in. "Keep your head clear," he said. "They will twist words. Document everything. Do not trust what is not written." His steady voice was the rope I clung to in the storm. Yet the storm was not only legal, it was emotional, relentless. My mother flooded my phone with voicemails that swung between guilt and rage. One message began with sobs, "Clara, do this for us, for Vanessa. She is the future," then ended with sharpness. "You ungrateful child! Do you want this family to collapse?" My father's texts were blunt commands. "Sign tomorrow. Do not drag this out." Vanessa, meanwhile, posted photos online of herself in the Lake Oswego house, tagging them with captions like, "Family strong legacy intact," while her followers showered her with praise. Every post felt like a taunt, a reminder that in the public eye, she was the cherished daughter and I was nothing but a shadow. One night, after closing shift, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot and pressed record on my phone as I replayed the voicemail messages, saving them as evidence. My hands shook, but this time it was not only fear, it was resolve. They thought they were cornering me. They did not know I was building a file that could corner them. 2 days later, I returned to the Lake Oswego house, not because I wanted to, but because avoidance would give them more power. The moment I stepped inside, Vanessa's perfume lingered in the air, sharp and floral. She was seated at the kitchen island, scrolling her phone while my parents stood behind her like a council. Papers were ready again, neatly stacked, a pen laid across the top like a weapon waiting to be used. My mother's tone was syrupy. "Clara, sweet girl, let us finish this. You will feel relieved once it is done." My father's jaw was set, his voice firm. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I placed my phone on the counter screen down but recording. I asked calmly, "Who signed my name last week?" The room froze for a heartbeat before Vanessa laughed softly. "Does it matter? Consider it done." Her words landed like a slap. My mother's eyes darted, her lips pursed, but she said nothing. My father growled, "Enough of this. Sign now." I felt a tremor of fear, yet I also felt the weight of my phone, the quiet proof capturing every word. For the first time in years, I lifted my chin. "No," I said. The silence that followed was jagged. My father's face darkened, my mother's cheeks flushed. Vanessa smirked as if she had already won. Then my father stepped forward, his hand gripping my shoulder with a force that made me stumble against the counter. My breath caught. The shove was not enough to bruise, but it was enough to tell me the truth. Love had left the house a long time ago. What remained was control. I steadied myself, heart pounding, and repeated, "No." My mother gasped as if I had cursed, her voice rising. "Do not defy us, Clara. Family comes first." But those words no longer had power. They were chains I had learned to see clearly. I grabbed my bag and walked out, my father's voice echoing behind me, calling me selfish, ungrateful, disloyal. As I drove back to Portland, my hands still trembling on the wheel, I knew I had reached a point of no return. I had said no once, and I would not take it back. That night, I called Grandpa. He answered on the first ring. "I am ready to help," he said simply, and I believed him. For the first time since childhood, I was not invisible. I was preparing for the moment they least expected, the moment when silence would no longer protect them but expose them. The morning after that confrontation, I woke to find a string of text messages flooding my phone. My mother's tone shifted from anger to tenderness and back again in the span of minutes. Clara, you are making a mistake. Clara, you are tearing this family apart. Clara, we love you and only want what is best. I stared at the screen, the glow casting pale light across my Portland room, and felt the old pull of guilt creeping in. For years, guilt had been their tool. Whenever I resisted even a little, they painted me as ungrateful. Now the stakes were higher and the script had not changed. I pressed record on my phone again and read the messages out loud, capturing not only the words, but the way my voice trembled as I spoke them. Later that day, I stopped at the Lake Oswego Library to scan copies of the legal documents I had photographed. The librarian raised an eyebrow at the dense pages but said nothing. I slipped the scans onto a flash drive and hid it deep in my bag. Evidence Grandpa had told me was the only shield that mattered. That evening, I drove back to the Whitman house to return some of my belongings, still stored in the garage. My father was waiting in the driveway, arms crossed. "You will not drag us through courts," he said before I could step out of the car. "If you fight us, we will cut you off for good." His voice carried the weight of finality, but instead of fear, I felt a strange clarity. "You already did," I replied and walked past him. Inside, Vanessa was perched on the couch in leggings and a silk blouse, her phone angled just right for a photo. She looked up with mock sweetness. "Clara," she said, "you should not resist so much. The house was never really yours. It belongs to the one who knows how to use it." My mother emerged from the kitchen holding a folder. "Enough games," she said sharply. "Sign this addendum and we will be done." She placed the folder on the coffee table, flipping it open to reveal yet another document with my name typed neatly. This time, to my horror, my signature was already there, perfectly clean, a copy lifted from some old school form. My stomach lurched. "You forged me again," I whispered. Vanessa chuckled. "It is just paperwork, Clara. You would have agreed anyway." The words cut deeper than any insult. Just paperwork, just duty, just family. They had taken my identity and flattened it into utility. My father's patience snapped. He slammed his fist on the table. "Stop being dramatic. You are young. You will bounce back. Your sister is the face of this family. You are the backbone. Do your job." His words echoed against the high ceilings. For a moment, I felt 12 again, standing by the maple tree cropped out of the photo. But then my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket, the recording still running, capturing everything. I met my father's glare with a steady gaze. "No," I said again. My mother's face twisted with fury. "You selfish child! We fed you, we clothed you, we gave you life. How dare you withhold from us now?" Vanessa tilted her head and smirked. She always was the dramatic one. Imagine thinking she matters as much as I do. My vision blurred with tears, but I did not cry. I turned and walked out once more, clutching the folder I had swiped from the table, my father's shouts chasing me into the night. In the car, I opened the folder and confirmed what I already knew. My name had been used like currency, my signature a counterfeit weapon. I took photographs under the dim glow of the dashboard light, then tucked the folder under my seat. When I reached my apartment, I placed it in the metal lockbox where I kept my passport and birth certificate. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing Vanessa's words replaying, "It was never yours," like a mantra designed to erase me. But as the clock ticked past 2 in the morning, I realized something. They had crossed into criminal ground. This was no longer just family manipulation. This was fraud. And if they wanted a battle of paper, I would fight with paper too. 2 days later, I met Grandpa at a diner in Salem, the kind of place with chipped mugs and vinyl booths that smelled of bacon grease. He sat across from me, shoulders still broad despite his age, his eyes sharper than anyone else in the family ever gave him credit for. I slid the folder across the table. He flipped through the forged documents slowly, his jaw tightening as he turned each page. When he reached the fake signature, he exhaled through his nose and said quietly, "They have trapped themselves." He closed the folder and tapped it once. "You must not face this alone. You need witnesses, records, allies." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Carry this with you. Let them speak. People like your parents cannot resist confessing when they believe they hold power. I nodded, clutching the device as if it were armor. That evening, I returned to Portland and prepared. I organized the files on my laptop into folders labeled Dates, Recordings, Scans. I wrote notes of every conversation, every threat, every false promise. I had never felt so focused. My parents thought they were orchestrating a seamless transfer of wealth to Vanessa, but, in truth, they were weaving a net around themselves. The next confrontation came faster than I expected. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, her perfume flooding the hallway before I even opened the door. She walked in without invitation, eyes sweeping over my modest space with disdain. "Clara, this is beneath you," she said, wrinkling her nose at the small table stacked with textbooks. "Sign the papers and you will not have to live like this anymore." I placed the recorder on the counter, the red light blinking faintly. "You forged my name," I said evenly. She froze, then recovered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was for efficiency. "We all know you would have said yes eventually. Why delay the inevitable?" Her words sliced through me. Efficiency. I was not a daughter. I was a transaction. I kept my voice steady. I never consented. That is fraud. Her face hardened, the smile vanishing. Fraud. How dare you use that word against your own mother, after all we have done for you? She stepped closer, her tone low and sharp. Do you think anyone will believe you over us? We are the family. You are the stray. I felt the recorder's weight in my pocket. For once, I was not alone in the room. The evidence was with me. She stormed out after I refused again, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I stood shaking in the silence, but when I replayed the recording later that night, I felt a flicker of strength. Her own words, her own contempt preserved forever. Meanwhile, Vanessa escalated her campaign of erasure. On social media, she posted a carefully edited family photo from last summer, cropped so that only a sliver of my arm remained visible. Her caption read, "Family is everything. Excited to continue our legacy." Comments poured in praising her devotion, her beauty, her leadership. Not one mention of me. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. They were rewriting history in real time, and the world believed it. I thought of the years of being cropped out, pushed aside, silenced. This was not new, only louder. But now I had something different proof. That night I called Grandpa and told him about the photo. He listened quietly, then said, "Clara, truth has a way of breaking through when you shine light on it. Be patient. Collect. The day will come." His calm steadied me. At the end of that week, my parents summoned me again, this time to a formal family dinner at the Lake Oswego house. The table was set with polished silverware and crystal glasses, candles flickering as if the evening were a celebration. But the air was heavy. My uncle, my aunt, even 2 cousins were present. Vanessa presided like a queen, raising her glass to toast the strength of family bonds. Midway through the meal, the conversation shifted, deliberate and pointed. "It is just a kidney one," cousin said, half joking, echoing a past cruelty. "It is not like you are giving your life." Laughter followed. Then my mother leaned forward. "Clara, stop resisting. Sign the house over. It is what any good daughter would do." All eyes turned to me. My hands gripped the edge of the table. I felt the recorder in my pocket. I wanted to shout, to accuse, to expose. Instead, I swallowed the words and simply nodded, letting them think they still had me. Because the more they believed in my silence, the deeper their arrogance grew, and the more damning their words became. After dinner, I excused myself and drove straight to Grandpa's. I handed him the new recording. He listened, his face darkening with each sentence. "They are hanging themselves," he said at last, "and you are the one holding the rope." For the first time, I believed it. My whole life I had been invisible. Now invisibility was my power. I was gathering every whisper, every forged line, every cruel joke, and shaping it into something undeniable. My parents thought coercion would break me. Instead, it taught me how to build a case. And when the day of the notary came, they would discover what they had never expected. The quiet one had been listening all along. The night the breaking point arrived, rain lashed hard against the streets of Portland, the kind of storm that rattled windows and left the air metallic with tension. I had been sitting at my small desk, textbooks spread open but unread, when my phone lit up with a message from my father. "Come home now. No more delays." My stomach knotted. I knew what awaited me in Lake Oswego, yet I could not ignore it. Hours later, I pulled into the familiar driveway, headlights illuminating the cedar siding of the house that had haunted me my entire life. The windows glowed warm, but inside, the atmosphere was anything but. My parents were waiting in the living room. Vanessa sprawled on the couch, scrolling her phone as if this were a casual evening. Papers were once again laid out this time, heavier with legal stamps and seals, their authority stamped into every margin. My mother gestured sharply. "Clara, sit." My father's tone was clipped cold. "We are done with your hesitation." I remained standing. "I will not sign," I said, voice steady, though my knees trembled. Silence followed for a heartbeat, then my father surged forward, his hand gripping my arm hard enough to send pain shooting up to my shoulder. He shoved me against the wall, the impact reverberating through my ribs. My breath caught in shock. My mother hissed, "Martin, stop," but her tone was not protective. It was annoyed, as if I were making things inconvenient. Vanessa lifted her phone, eyes gleaming. "Smile, Clara," she said mockingly, angling the screen as if to capture the moment. For a split second, I thought she was filming, but then I realized she was already live broadcasting her version of family unity to her followers. On the stream, she declared, "We are consolidating family assets. We are stronger than ever." Behind her words, the image showed me crumpled against the wall out of focus, as if I were once again a blurred edge of a photograph. Rage and despair collided inside me. My father's grip loosened only when he saw my phone slip from my pocket, red recording light glowing faintly. He cursed, shoving me away with disgust. My mother snatched the phone, but I lunged forward, snatching it back before she could erase the evidence. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They froze. They had never heard me raise my voice like that. For a moment, I felt power surge through me, but it was fleeting. Vanessa smirked and ended her stream, tossing her phone aside. "No one will believe you," she said softly, "because you are always the dramatic one." I ran from the room, heart pounding, the taste of copper in my mouth from where I had bitten my lip. I drove back to Portland through sheets of rain, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My chest burned with both pain and fury. In my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, clutching the phone to my chest. For hours, I replayed the livestream clip, watching as my sister curated lies for her audience, erasing me in real time. My ribs throbbed with every breath. I wanted to disappear under the blanket, to retreat into silence, as I had done my entire childhood. Yet another part of me screamed louder. Enough. Enough of being erased. Enough of being told I was selfish, enough of being pushed against walls, both figurative and real. That night, I opened my laptop and created a folder labeled Proof. I uploaded the live stream, the audio recordings, the forged documents, the voicemails. Each file was a brick in a wall of truth that I would use to stand against them. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept typing notes, dates, times. It was past 3 in the morning when I finally stopped. I stared at the screen and whispered to myself, "They cannot erase me anymore." Exhaustion pulled me under, but when I woke hours later, the storm had cleared and sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds. My chest still ached, but the clarity remained. That confrontation had broken something, but not me. It had broken the illusion that obedience would ever buy me love. And from that fracture, a new resolve emerged. I was not simply a daughter anymore. I was the keeper of evidence, the witness to my own survival. And I would not stay quiet again. The days after that storm felt like walking through fog, every sound muted, every step uncertain. Yet under the haze, something inside me had hardened. My ribs still ached when I bent over a dull reminder of the night my father had shoved me against the wall, but the pain was no longer just physical. It was proof that the line between family discipline and outright violence had been crossed. I carried that ache with me to work at Stumptown, pouring coffee with a practiced smile, while customers chatted about weather and sports, unaware that the girl behind the counter was quietly documenting her parents for fraud. At night, I sat at my desk uploading files, labeling them with dates and times, each folder another shield. Vanessa continued her online campaign, posting glossy images of the Lake Oswego house decorated with fall wreaths, captions declaring unity and love. In one video, she twirled through the living room, laughing, and behind her on the mantel was a photo of our family taken years ago. My image had been cropped out just as always. That erasure hit harder than her smirk had. It was not enough for them to control me in private. They wanted to erase me publicly, too. I replayed that video until my stomach churned, then saved it to the folder marked Evidence. 2 nights later, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. They pushed inside before I could protest, filling the small space with their presence. My mother's eyes scanned the room with disdain, her lips curling as she said, "Clara, you are living like a stranger. This is not who you are." My father held another folder thicker this time. "You will sign now," he said. "We are done playing games." He set the papers on my table and opened them with a flourish. Vanessa stood in the doorway behind them, phone in hand, recording again. I felt my pulse race, my chest tightening. I remembered Grandpa's words, let them speak, let them reveal themselves. I pressed the digital recorder in my pocket, the red light blinking faintly. "What happens if I refuse?" I asked. My father's eyes darkened. "You will regret it," my mother added sharply. "We will make sure you are cut out completely. No home, no inheritance, no family." Vanessa's laugh chimed in. "You never mattered anyway." The words stung, but the recorder captured them. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the cups. "Sign or you will wish you had," he growled. The threat hung heavy in the air. For a moment, I feared another shove, another bruise. My hands trembled, but I stayed still, refusing to reach for the pen. Instead, I whispered, "No." The silence that followed was volcanic. My mother gasped, her face flushing crimson. My father clenched his fists. Vanessa lifted her phone higher as if to broadcast my refusal as another dramatic tantrum. But in truth, every word, every threat was being preserved for the moment of reckoning. They left in fury, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. I sank onto the couch, shaking tears streaming unchecked. But even through the fear, a strange calm spread in me. They had shown who they truly were, and I had it all on record. That night, with trembling hands, I sent copies of the recordings to Grandpa, attaching a note. "They will not stop. I need help." His reply came minutes later. "You are not alone. Hold steady. Justice is slower than rage, but it arrives." I clutched my phone and breathed, feeling for the first time that my silence had transformed into strength. The breaking point had not shattered me. It had exposed them. And in that exposure lay the beginning of their downfall. The morning of the signing dawned gray and wet, typical Portland weather that turned the streets slick and the air heavy with mist. I drove downtown with my heart hammering against my ribs, my phone buzzing constantly with messages from my mother. "Be on time, Clara. Do not embarrass us. This is your duty." Each ping made my pulse spike, but I kept driving. The notary office was in a narrow building lined with glass windows that reflected the drizzle outside. I parked and sat for a long moment in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers went numb. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet something steadier whispered to keep going. Inside the office, the fluorescent lights buzzed, faintly illuminating the sterile beige walls. A small American flag stood in the corner. Behind the desk sat a middle-aged notary public named Ms. Allen, who greeted us with professional calm, her eyes darting from me to my parents. My father carried the folder with him, Vanessa trailing close behind her phone, tucked away, but her smirk ready. My mother leaned down to whisper, "Smile. This will be over soon." I sat at the polished table as Ms. Allen checked my identification. Her tone was neutral routine. She flipped through the pages and read aloud, "This is a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of the Whitman property in Lake Oswego." Her eyes lifted to me. "Do you sign this willingly?" The question echoed in the room. My throat tightened. My parents stood behind me like shadows, their presence pressing down on me. My father's voice cut through the silence. "Answer yes." My mother's hand brushed my shoulder in a grip disguised as affection. I froze pen, trembling, in my hand. Ms. Allen watched carefully. She had to follow procedure, and the law required her to verify free consent. Yet she could not read the years of coercion etched into my silence. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Vanessa exhaled impatiently. Clara, just sign. Stop being dramatic. The pen hovered over the line. My mind flashed with images of childhood birthdays where candles were blown out for me, of photographs where I was cropped from the frame of nights when my father told me to be practical, of the shove against the wall that still ached in my ribs. Signing this paper would not only erase me from the house, it would erase me from my own story. My hand began to lower, a single dot of ink touching the page. And then the door burst open. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Everyone turned as Grandpa entered, his heavy coat dripping from the rain, his cane tapping the floor with deliberate force. Beside him strode Sheriff Daniels of Multnomah County uniform, crisp authority radiating with every step. A woman in a navy suit followed, carrying a leather briefcase. Ms. Allen straightened in her chair. Startled, the sheriff's voice rang out firm and commanding. "Stop this proceeding. This signing is under investigation for fraud and coercion." My mother gasped. My father's face drained of color. Vanessa clutched her phone. Ms. Allen immediately slid the documents away from me and closed the folder. Her duty clear once the sheriff spoke. Grandpa stepped forward and placed another folder on the table. His voice, though softer than the sheriff's, carried a weight that silenced the room. "This child is not signing anything today. Not under threats, not under forgery, not under duress." He opened the folder and laid out copies of the forged signatures, transcripts of voicemails, screenshots of Vanessa's live streams, photographs of documents already bearing my name without consent. The woman in the navy suit introduced herself as legal counsel for the county, confirming that an injunction had been filed that very morning based on evidence submitted. "Any deed signed under coercion is void," she explained. Sheriff Daniels added, "If this continues, criminal charges will follow." The tension in the room was electric. My father sputtered, "This is a family matter." The sheriff fixed him with a stare. "Fraud is not a family matter, sir. It is a crime." My mother's voice shook with anger. "She is our daughter. She owes us this." Grandpa turned to her, his eyes blazing. "A daughter owes no parent her silence. Not her body, not her home, nothing." His words hung in the air like a gavel striking. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents speechless. Vanessa tried to laugh, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. "This is all exaggerated. She is making a scene. She always does." Ms. Allen's voice cut in cool and professional. "This proceeding is terminated. I will not notarize under these conditions." Relief flooded me so suddenly my chest ached. The pen fell from my hand onto the table. My parents' plan had shattered in seconds. The silence after Ms. Allen's declaration was almost heavier than the storm that had preceded it. My father's face flushed crimson as if the air itself had betrayed him. He reached across the table, snatching at the papers, but the woman in the navy suit slid them into her briefcase with calm efficiency. "These documents are now evidence," she said, her tone clipped. My mother clutched her pearls as if the weight of consequence were strangling her. "You cannot do this!" she hissed, but even her voice cracked with panic. Vanessa hovered near the wall, her phone shaking in her hand, torn between filming the chaos and hiding her face. Sheriff Daniels stood steady hands at his belt, his voice deliberate. "Ma'am, I advise you to calm down. Any further interference may result in removal from the premises." His authority left no space for argument. My father tried again, desperation leaking into his words. "This is family property. This is between us." Grandpa's cane tapped against the floor, each strike echoing like punctuation. "It stopped being between us the moment you forged her name. It stopped being private when you put her against a wall and called it discipline. You raised Vanessa to believe cruelty was strength, and you told Clara she was nothing. Today, that ends." I stared at him, my throat tightening. All my life I had wanted someone to say the truth aloud, to pierce the silence that had smothered me, and here it was, laid bare in a notary office in downtown Portland. Meh. Alan gathered her stamp and seal, placing them back in her drawer with finality. "This session is closed," she said firmly. She turned to me. "Miss Whitman, you are under no obligation to sign anything. If anyone pressures you again, report it immediately." I nodded, words tangled in my chest. My mother muttered under her breath, "Ungrateful child!" The sheriff's gaze snapped to her. "That is enough!" Vanessa finally spoke, her voice shaking but sharp. "She is ruining everything. She always wanted to be the victim. This house was meant for me." The room seemed to still at her outburst. Grandpa turned to her slowly. "Vanessa, a home is not meant for the one who shouts the loudest. It is meant for the one who honors it. And you have done nothing but mock and destroy." For once, Vanessa had no smirk, only a quiver in her lip. My father slammed his fist on the table one last time, but the sound felt hollow. The sheriff stepped forward, voice carrying finality. "That is enough. You will leave now." He motioned to the door. My parents hesitated, but the weight of law stood taller than their pride. They gathered their coats in silence and left with Vanessa trailing her heels, clicking like the last desperate rhythm of a song no one wanted to hear. When the door closed behind them, I exhaled a breath I had been holding for years. My hand shook as I picked up the fallen pen and set it back on the table untouched. Grandpa placed his hand over mine, steadying it. "You did not disappear today," he said softly. "You stood." Tears blurred my vision, but I let them fall. Ms. Allen looked at me with quiet sympathy. "Take care of yourself," she said. The woman in the navy suit handed Grandpa her card. "We will proceed with the injunction paperwork. She is safe for now." Grandpa slipped the card into his pocket and guided me out into the misty Portland air. The drizzle cooled my flushed face as we walked to his car. The courthouse clock chimed in the distance, each note steady as if marking the start of something new. For the first time in my life, I left a room without being erased. The news spread faster than I ever imagined. Within a day of the aborted signing, whispers rippled through Lake Oswego. Neighbors who had long admired the Whitman house with its wide lakefront windows began murmuring that something had gone wrong at the notary office. At first, I thought it would remain quiet contained, but Grandpa had prepared differently. The folder of evidence he presented was not just for show. He submitted copies to the county courthouse where the injunction became public record. Reporters who trawled legal filings for scandals latched on immediately. By Friday morning, the Portland Tribune carried a small headline, "Forgery allegations surround 6 Mellellers Whitman property." My phone buzzed with notifications I had not sought. Friends from high school texted me screenshots asking if it was true. My shift at Stumptown became a blur of sidelong glances and whispered questions. Customers who once treated me as invisible now leaned in, curious. "Are you the Clara Whitman?" One woman asked, her tone a mix of sympathy and fascination. I nodded once, too weary to explain. Grandpa called that night, his voice calm but edged with steel. The moment we opened the record, Clara the Truth became unstoppable. "Do not hide now. Stand firm." His words settled into me like anchors. The following week, the fallout hit harder. Local television picked up the story, broadcasting footage of the Whitman house while narrators spoke of coercion and forged signatures. The sight of my childhood home plastered across the evening news was surreal. They called it the $6 million scandal. Interviews with neighbors filled the segments. Mrs. Klein from across the street shook her head on camera. I always wondered why Clara wasn't around much. She was such a quiet girl. Now it makes sense. A younger neighbor chimed in, and Vanessa always bragged online. Maybe it was too good to be true. Their voices, once part of the chorus that ignored me, now echoed a different tune. I watched the broadcasts in Grandpa's living room in Salem, sitting on his worn sofa, while the ocean-scented wind drifted through the open window. Each word was both vindication and ache. I never wanted to be exposed like this, but neither could I turn away. My parents, meanwhile, scrambled to maintain control. Vanessa posted a video insisting everything was a misunderstanding. She sat in the grand living room with the fireplace glowing behind her, speaking with feigned calm. Our family has always valued unity. Rumors about fraud are exaggerated. We are working together to resolve this. But the comments told a harsher truth. Followers demanded answers. Some unfollowed, others accused her of lying. Screenshots of her earlier live stream, the one where she laughed about consolidating assets while I stood blurred in the background, resurfaced. Strangers dissected every word, every frame, pointing out my hunched figure as evidence that the narrative she spun was false. It was the first time the public had seen me not polished, not staged, just real. And that image pierced more than any caption could. At the county hearing that followed, Sheriff Daniels and the attorney laid out the evidence. They played the recordings of my parents threatening me, the voicemails dripping with coercion, the photos of my forged signature. Each word, each image felt like reopening wounds, yet also like disinfecting them. Sunlight seared where shadows had thrived. My parents sat across the room, faces stiff, their lawyer arguing weakly that it was family misunderstanding. The judge cut him off. Forgery is not misunderstanding, it is crime. For the first time, the weight shifted. I was not the child silenced at the dinner table. I was the witness, and the room listened. When the session ended, reporters clustered outside, microphones thrust forward. I barely spoke, only said, "The truth matters." My voice trembled, but it carried farther than I had ever thought possible. In the weeks that followed, the exposure widened until it felt as if all of Oregon knew the name Whitman not for lakefront prestige, but for scandal. Articles dissected the case, highlighting the value of the $6 million property, the attempt to shift ownership through coercion, and the sheriff's dramatic intervention at the notary office. I read them in silence, my name appearing in print for the first time, not as a footnote, but as a central figure. It felt strange, almost disorienting to be seen. At Stumptown, coworkers who had once overlooked me now asked if I was holding up. Some strangers left small notes with their coffee orders. "Stay strong," Clara scrawled on napkins. Support from people I had never met steadied me, though. It also reminded me how deeply I had craved acknowledgement all along. My parents, however, spiraled. The investigation into fraudulent conveyance intensified. Reporters camped outside the Lake Oswego property, their cameras waiting for a glimpse of the once-admired Whitman couple. Vanessa's sponsorship deals collapsed one after another as brands distanced themselves from her tarnished image. I saw a clip of her on local news, storming away from a reporter's question, her voice rising. "It is all lies." The comment sections told another story. People posted side-by-side comparisons of her old captions praising family unity with the recordings now public of her mocking me. Her credibility crumbled in real time. For once, the audience she had built turned against her. At another county hearing, more evidence surfaced: emails where my parents discussed tax advantages of pushing the deed into Vanessa's name texts, where they referred to me as the placeholder. Hearing those words read aloud under fluorescent lights was brutal, yet necessary. The judge's expression grew grimmer with each revelation. "This is no longer a civil misunderstanding," he said. "This is deliberate." The phrase struck like a verdict even before one was issued. Grandpa sat beside me, his hand steady on his cane, and for the first time I felt that justice was not a distant dream, but a process already in motion. The public reaction became almost overwhelming. Letters began arriving at Grandpa's Salem home, handwritten notes from people who had seen the story on television. Some told me they had faced similar coercion, siblings favored over them, inheritances stolen. Others simply wrote, "We believe you." I read them late into the night, tears smudging the ink, realizing that my story resonated far beyond Lake Oswego. It was not just my fight anymore. It was a mirror for others who had been silenced. The exposure culminated in a press conference where Sheriff Daniels confirmed that charges were being considered. Standing behind him, I listened as cameras clicked and reporters scribbled. He said firmly, "This case illustrates that coercion within families is still coercion under the law. Fraud does not hide under the word duty." His words echoed what Grandpa had told me in the notary office. And when a reporter asked me what I wanted, I answered simply, "I want the truth to matter. I want to live without being erased." The microphones captured my trembling voice, but for once, trembling did not mean weakness. It meant humanity. When the press conference ended, Grandpa guided me through the crowd. the drizzle outside caught in the floodlights, sparkling like shards of glass. For the first time, I felt taller than the house that had once overshadowed me. The evidence was no longer hidden in folders or hard drives. It was public, undeniable, and louder than the lies ever were. The fallout came swiftly, as if once the dam had cracked, there was no stopping the flood. Within days of the press conference, official notices were delivered to my parents' Lake Oswego home. Investigators from the county moved in, combing through financial records, interviewing neighbors, pulling bank statements. My father, once so commanding at the head of the dinner table, now stood on the porch, unable to chase away the cameras. The image of him shouting at reporters ran on evening broadcasts, his voice hoarse, his gestures frantic. The caption beneath read, "Whitman Patriarch Faces Fraud Allegations." My mother tried to maintain composure, appearing in pearls and pressed blouses, but her words cracked whenever microphones pressed close. "It is all a misunderstanding," she insisted, yet the evidence contradicted every syllable. The neighborhood that once envied them now whispered doors closing as they walked by. A woman who had hosted book clubs with my mother told local radio they acted above everyone for years. Now we see the truth. For Vanessa, the consequences were brutal and immediate. Brands severed contracts citing moral clauses. A planned collaboration with a Portland boutique collapsed their statement blunt. "We do not condone fraudulent behavior." Her follower count plummeted as screenshots of her mocking live streams circulated widely. Where once comments praised her beauty, now they were laced with scorn. Liar 1 read, "You built your fame on someone else's silence." Another said, "I unfollowed after seeing Clara in the background." "You can't hide the truth." The image of me blurred and hunched behind her became a symbol online used in articles titled "The Forgotten Daughter." I had never asked for that recognition, yet it carried a strange justice. The county hearings progressed quickly. Officials announced they were considering charges of fraudulent conveyance, forgery, and coercion. I sat in the courtroom as transcripts of my parents' threats were read aloud. My hands shook, but I lifted my chin. The judge looked directly at me when affirming the injunction that froze all transfers of the Whitman house. "This property remains contested. Until resolution, it will not change hands," he ruled. Relief washed through me, though the weight of the process remained. For once, the law stood between me and their control. The community response was sharper than I had anticipated. At Stumptown, customers who once ignored me left notes of encouragement. "Stay strong," a barista scribbled on a receipt. A neighbor from Salem dropped off flowers at Grandpa's door. Even strangers on the street would nod when they recognized me, a quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer invisible. Yet with support came scrutiny. Headlines painted me alternately as the brave whistleblower or the tragic daughter. It was strange to see my life dissected, but it was no longer silence. And that difference mattered. My parents withdrew further into themselves. I heard through neighbors that arguments rattled the Whitman house at night, their voices carrying across the lake. Vanessa moved back home after losing her lease, her online empire crumbling. Together, they tried to present unity, but cracks showed. Every time they spoke in public, questions about fraud overshadowed their words. They had built a life on appearances, and now those appearances were in ashes. For me, the consequence was not just external. Internally, I felt layers peeling away, the old weight of guilt loosening. Each headline, each hearing, each voice that said, "We believe you chipped at the invisible chains my parents had wrapped around me since childhood." I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. Their texts still came, accusations, pleas, demands, but I saved them as evidence and nothing more. They had lost the power to define me. One evening, weeks after the first article, I stood with Grandpa on the cliffs near Cannon Beach, the Pacific, stretching endless and gray. The wind whipped my hair, salty and sharp. "They thought you were weak," he said, steady beside me. "But weakness is what they showed the moment they chose lies over love." I let the words sink in. For years, I had been erased, cropped from photos, silenced at tables, mocked in live streams. Now the world saw the truth. The fallout was not just their disgrace. It was my emergence. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was Clara Whitman, 19, standing at the edge of the sea with the horizon wide open. The weeks that followed felt like a slow dawn after years of storm. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I woke without the ache of obligation pressing on my chest. I packed a single suitcase and left Lake Oswego behind, moving into Grandpa's small home near Cannon Beach. The house was not grand. The walls creaked, the paint peeled in spots, and the kitchen smelled faintly of salt and cedar, but it was safe. Safe in a way no mansion could ever be. Every morning I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, a rhythm that reminded me life moved forward no matter who tried to hold it back. Grandpa gave me the spare bedroom once used as a study. He cleared space for my books, my sketches, even the small potted plant I brought from my apartment. "Make it yours," he said simply. I did, and each day the room felt more alive, not because of the furniture, but because I was finally breathing without fear. Healing did not come instantly. There were nights when I woke from dreams of my father's hand slamming the wall beside my head, or my mother's sharp voice hissing duty. There were afternoons when guilt tugged at me, whispering that perhaps I had ruined the family. Yet each time those shadows appeared, I reminded myself of the evidence, the truth I had collected, the public record that now stood as witness. I was not the liar. I was not the betrayer. They had written their own downfall. My role had only been to stop carrying the silence. Slowly, I began to believe that. Grandpa's presence anchored me. He did not smother me with questions or advice. Instead, he taught me to fix the old fence, to chop wood, to cook his favorite breakfast of eggs and hash. In the evenings, we played cards or listened to the radio. Sometimes we did not speak at all, simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset melt into the horizon. That quiet, shared without demand, healed parts of me that words never could. One evening, he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a notarized copy of his updated will. The Lake Oswego house was no longer in dispute. It was frozen by the courts, but his beach cottage and his savings were secured in my name. "It is not about property," he said. "It is about trust. I want you to know there is at least one place in this world where your name cannot be erased." My throat tightened as I folded the document back into its envelope. For the first time, I felt ownership not of a building, but of my own existence. At the same time, I began to dream again. Architecture had always been my passion, buried under years of dismissal. With Grandpa's encouragement, I applied to the University of Oregon in Eugene. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I cried in the driveway, clutching the paper as the sea breeze whipped around me. "You're building now," Grandpa set his hand on my shoulder. "Not just houses, yourself." Classes would start in the fall, and I had months to prepare. I filled sketchbooks with designs, some rough, some intricate, imagining structures that were open light-filled and impossible to erase anyone inside. Community followed me too. At Stumptown, where I still worked part-time, customers greeted me warmly. A group of women in their 50s invited me to join their book circle, saying, "You've lived through a novel already." Online messages trickled in from strangers who had read about my story. Some shared their own tales of families who tried to erase them. Others simply wrote, "You are seen." Each note stitched into me a new piece of belonging. I realized healing was not only about removing pain, but about weaving new threads where old ones had been torn. The legal battles continued in the background. My parents attended hearings, their lawyers scrambling, their reputations shredded. Vanessa tried to rebuild her online following, but every attempt was met with reminders of the scandal. For once, I did not feel responsible for cleaning their mess. The burden was no longer mine. The consequence belonged to those who had sown it. I was free to step aside, to live my life without carrying their shadows. One particular evening etched itself into my heart. I walked down to the beach with my journal, the same one I had carried since high school. I wrote a single line. They tried to erase me. Instead, I redrew myself. I closed the book and watched the tide erase footprints in the sand. For once, I did not fear disappearance. I knew that even if every mark faded, I carried my truth inside me. No one could strip that away. The true rebirth came not with a grand announcement, but with small choices. Waking early to run along the beach, studying design manuals late into the night, laughing with classmates on campus when orientation began, picking up sea glass with Grandpa's old dog beside me. These moments built a new foundation sturdier than any mansion walls. The life I had lost in Lake Oswego had never been mine to begin with. This life, quiet yet strong, was. As summer ended and fall began, I sat on the porch with Grandpa sipping coffee while gulls cried overhead. He asked, "Do you regret it?" Speaking up, exposing them, I thought for a long while, watching the horizon blur with mist. "No," I said finally. "I regret staying silent for so long." "But not this." He nodded satisfied, and we sat in companionable silence, letting the ocean speak for us. When I look back now, I see two lives stitched together by silence. The first life was the one they gave me, the quiet girl at the edge of photographs, the spare chair never pulled out at dinner, the voice that could be ignored because it never shouted. That life was small, contained, and measured in duties. It ended the moment I stood at the notary's desk in downtown Portland, pen trembling in my hand, and Grandpa walked in with Sheriff Daniels. The second life began there, not because the house was saved, not because the legal documents were stopped, but because for the first time someone had broken the silence with me instead of around me. That moment split my story open, and from it everything else grew. I want to speak directly to you now, the ones listening, the ones watching. Have you ever been told, family comes first, even when that family uses your silence as currency? Have you ever been told that love equals duty, even when duty feels like chains? I have lived that script, and I know how heavy it is. But here is the truth. I learned silence is not the same as peace, and duty is not the same as love. In the weeks after the confrontation, I returned often in my mind to that courtroom in Salem where my parents sat in shame and I sat upright for the first time. I remember how the judge's gavel echoed how Vanessa kept her eyes fixed on the table, how my father muttered about misunderstandings and how my mother dabbed her eyes for sympathy. But the community saw through it. Neighbors testified, reporters dug. The legal process did not erase my pain, but it gave it shape. It gave it language, fraud, coercion, duress. Words that had been absent from my childhood suddenly stood as definitions for what had been done to me. They could no longer call it love when the law called it crime. Healing, though, was not just about the courts or the headlines. It was about quiet mornings in Cannon Beach, sitting at Grandpa's old wooden table with sunlight slanting through the blinds. It was about sketching buildings that rose from wide foundations filled with windows, places where no one could be invisible. It was about walking across campus in Eugene with new friends who knew me as Clara the architecture student, not Clara the scapegoat. It was about laughter that did not carry the sting of obligation. There were still shadows. Some nights, lying awake, I heard echoes of my mother's voice saying family comes first. I would close my eyes and whisper back, family is not supposed to break you. And in the dark, I chose to believe my own voice louder than hers. That choice, repeated night after night, became its own kind of healing. Grandpa's presence was steady, a rock against the tide. He never asked me to hurry my recovery, never forced a smile onto my face. Instead, he showed me what consistency feels like: Sunday breakfasts with bacon and eggs, slow walks by the ocean, the same goodnight nod every evening. It was in his steadiness that I discovered the real opposite of chaos was not control. It was trust. One afternoon in late fall, I stood before the ocean with my journal open. The wind whipped the pages, but I managed to write. They used my silence. I used their noise. I am not erased. I am redrawn. The words steadied me. They reminded me that I had transformed what was meant to bury me into something that built me. That is the essence of rebirth. And yet, even as I built a new life, I felt the need to speak outward to break the silence for others who might still be trapped where I once was. That is why I am telling this story here, why I am sharing not just the facts, but the feeling. Because I know there is someone listening who has been cropped from their family's photograph, someone whose name is only spoken when chores need to be done. Someone whose voice has been twisted into duty. To you, I say you are not invisible. The silence you have been forced into is not the measure of your worth. The house in Lake Oswego still stands locked in litigation, a mansion with too many rooms echoing with absence. But I no longer crave its halls or its lake views. My inheritance is not brick or deed. It is the knowledge that I refused to sign away myself. That is worth more than $6 million, more than any estate. Revenge was never the point, though consequences came. Exposure was never about humiliation, though truth revealed itself publicly. What mattered in the end was reclaiming my own narrative. I was not the dutiful daughter who gave everything away. I was the young woman who said no, even when saying no shook the ground beneath her. That is the story I want remembered. Now let me ask you again, because this is where your story and mine meet. Have you ever been told that your place in the family depends on what you can give, not who you are? Have you ever been pushed into silence because speaking would disrupt the fragile picture others painted? If you have, pause with me here. Take a breath. Then tell me in the comments below. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me the moment you realized silence was breaking you. Tell me what you chose or what you wish you could choose. Your voice matters. You matter. If my story resonates with you, do not keep it in the dark. Share it not because I seek fame, but because maybe someone else needs to hear that they are not alone. Hit the like button if you felt the pulse of recognition. Subscribe if you want to hear more true stories where silence breaks and truth rises, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next chapter. This channel is not just about me. It is about us, the invisible daughters, the overlooked sons, the ones who were told duty before dignity. Together, we rewrite what family means. I will leave you with one last image. Picture Clara Whitman, 19 years old, sitting on a wooden bench above Cannon Beach. The sun sets in streaks of orange and violet. A notebook rests in her lap. On the page is a simple line. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became the author. That is not just my ending. It can be yours too. So if you have ever been told family comes first, even when that family breaks you, remember this. Your voice is not a gift they get to use. It is yours. Speak it, write it, live it, and let it be heard.